Hello and welcome to part 2 of Refuting Marx's Inconsistency, Capital and the TSSI. We have Lexi, Emmanuel, Alex, Rosa, and damn it, I'm after leaving my audio on again, so it's interrupted me. That's twice in a row. Okay, so we have Lexi.
Hi.
We have Emmanuel.
Oh.
We've got Alex.
Hi, how's it going?
We've got Rosa.
Hello.
And we have Emmanuel, not Emmanuel, you were here already. We've got Amog, it will be joining us later, I think. So we've got 2 new participants here today. We've got Alex. Do you want to introduce yourself a bit before we start? I know you introduced last week, but I didn't actually get you to say anything.
Yeah, not a problem, Tom. So I'm just a long-time listener from Alpha to Omega, more recently as Side. Just looking to learn more about Marx, and Kleiman's been on my radar for a while, so I thought this would be a good opportunity to go through the text.
So what time is it in Sydney, Australia?
It is now 2:30 a.m.
Oh my God, you're a brave soul.
Yeah.
And we got Rosa as well. Rosa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I guess I'm like from Swampside. I do it with Lexi, just a podcast. And I've actually had this book for a while, Reclaiming Marx's Capital. My grandfather got it for me before he died relatively recently. And I never really got a chance to finish it, so this is my chance to really finish it.
Yeah.
I can't imagine having a grandfather buy me an Andrew Kleiman book.
Sounds like a cool grandpa.
Oh yeah, he was complaining about it the entire time. He was like, it's having me getting commie books for you, God.
He wasn't complaining on it about a theoretical level. He wasn't a simultaneous, was he? Another bad joke from me. Okay, well.
Damn orthodox Marxist value theorists. They just can't accept Okishio theorem.
Stop. That's a dumb joke.
Another insensitive joke from Tom O'Brien. Now, well, why don't we start back to where... Oh, before we start, going into the more new juicy stuff, we have a couple of errors or issues from last week that we should probably... we're probably going to just talk a quick bit through. We had a comment on the episode saying that we had made an error, which was correct. I misdefined fixed capital as the part of capital that was physically kind of strapped down, like buildings and machinery, while in actuality, it's the part of capital that doesn't transfer all of its value in the one go, in the one production period. So the idea there might be a milkman's truck. Maybe over 10 years, the truck will break down, and over that 10 years, it'll transfer a small bit of value to each pint of milk. But it's fixed capital, even though it's able to drive around. Okay, yep. So that was a kind of a basic error I made there. Another interesting thing I think that's worth mentioning is, Lexi, you talked a little bit how you thought that the book was somehow a kind of a mashing of Say's law into Marxism, that a lot of the simultaneous kind of, what in Kleiman's terms, Marxism or post-Marxian or Marxian stuff.
Yeah, that was my attempt to figure out how, to try to find a rhyming incident from the history of economics that could, give me a lay of the land to grapple with how everyone could be wrong. You know what I mean? Have to be something like this, that in the maths, there's something like a Say's law that's actually a controversial ideological assumption.
Yeah, I was kind of skeptical. I was a bit skeptical of whether you were right or not. It struck me initially that you were right, and then when I thought about it, I thought you were wrong. So I decided to fire a question to Andrew about it, and I'll just read out what he said here. He said, he says the models seem to be ultimately derived from Walras's general equilibrium framework. And he basically had a counterpart to Say's law, known as Walras's law. But then he goes on to say that everything is shrouded in confusion owing to different and incompatible uses of the term Say's law. He says, and then he says the use of simultaneous valuation in Schaffianism and Marxian, inverted commas, economics is often limited to production/supply. So there's no necessary link to any conservation principle regarding supply and demand. So I think he's kind of saying maybe, but I think you're kind of on the right track. It's the application of general equilibrium framework to Marx's value theory, which to me is just, kind of a travesty, because they seem to be diametrically opposed. As one is, a motion of sequence in time, and the other is one of these general equilibrium type things.
Yeah, on paper, and I'm going to say this a lot. I'm like a methodological Janist. I always think that there's going to be some kind of nuggets of truth in what everybody's doing, and like a pluralist to some degree. Like at the end of the day, somebody's more right than others. But like, I wonder, what the Walrases of the world, I should say, are getting out of this besides the ideological, justification. If there's really anything else there.
Yeah, I can't see any more in it. I think you definitely hit onto something there with your tying it to Say's law or Walras's law, which are very similar. I had a look up at them during the week, and they're quite similar. So I think you've definitely hit something there. The third bit, the last bit then that I thought we could talk about was where I certainly came away from the discussion a little bit confused about when we talked about where Andrew made this kind of distinct point about the definition of what value is. I'm just trying to find it here in the text. Let's see here now.
In the beginning there.
Does anybody know whereabouts he says?
It's definitely earlier in the chapter. Let me go through.
Okay. Let me see.
Right on the end of page 21.
Okay. Yeah.
2.1.2, determination of value by labor time.
Okay. Yes. So we're there.
Blah, blah, blah. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the bit I'll highlight it here now. Marx's theory that a commodity's value is determined by the amount of labor time needed to produce it is often being construed as a definition. So I quizzed up Andrew on this because it seemed like to me that was quite definitional, that was quite axiomatic about the whole theory. But what he said was that he thought that value was really defined implicitly in Marx's work as the social non-material substance that is common to all commodities. So this is the idea. So that's what he says he thinks is the definition of value. This idea that all commodities have got that thing that's in common between them all that allows them to exchange. That's the definition of value.
Not them to be exchanged, but
okay. Common. Yeah. Okay. I've said that incorrectly. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I think this. So I think the issue here is that there's that third thing argument that I think Andrew and you are getting at, is this like, there are ratios between, let's say abstractly, if you're trading, 10 yards of linen for a bale of wheat or whatever, there's an implicit metric of comparison there. And so there must be, like, it seems like he says in the book, logically, there must be a third thing that allows you to quantify like the units of difference there between the two things in the ratio. I think what's maybe bringing about some confusion is that, logically speaking, I don't know if this actually holds. You could, in theory, just do a series of ratios. You wouldn't necessarily need that. However, in real life, if this is the real abstraction, if there are things being compared iteratively over and over again, frequently, this is something that emerges. It's an emergent property. I think that's the best way I can get at it, is that the reason that he doesn't believe that this is an axiom is because it's an emergent property of the system. And if you take the third thing argument literally, logically, then it's not an axiom because it's a conclusion,
Exactly.
But I don't know if I don't know if the argument logically processes. However, I do think the real abstraction is happening.
Can I just quickly interject something here, because I'm super into the whole third thing argument.
Yes.
Cool. So one thing that perhaps would help the listeners getting through this is Kleiman has written an article, which is perhaps the best named article I know of, which is the fourth thing on the third thing, available on the website, and it goes through the third thing argument, I think, quite convincingly. But the Kleiman's response here is completely true. Marx does not, in the actual text of Capital, say that value is by definition labor. Rather, he goes through this elaborate argumentative process where he, just as you said, Lexi, he goes to reality, objective reality, and sees that in the marketplace, 10 t-shirts exchange for one shoe. And wherever we find, so that means that whatever these one t-shirt has, therefore, a tenth of something that the shoe has. If they didn't share a common substance, then they couldn't be converted into each other, and etc. And then he sort of tries to get at what could this third substance be. It's sort of like an energy argument, right? So if we're going to say that a 2-hour workout equals these and these many calories, well, how can that be, right? How could it be that a protein bar, a 10-minute, an hour of workout, and the heat required to heat up these and these many gallons of water, how come they're all sort of speaking the same language? Well, it's because they're all equal in terms of a third thing, namely energy, and energy can take all of these different forms, etc. So that's sort of the third thing argument, and
right.
It really matters, because if the third, my position, and I think Kleiman's position too, is that if the third thing argument falls, the entirety of Marxist theory falls.
Like in that energy example, though, it's not a matter of logic that there's a third thing. It's just a fact about the emergent system, right? The fact that that's happening in energies like suggests that in the system it's there. I think I don't want to get too hung up on the abstract logic here, because I feel like when people are making fun of this argument, saying, well, this doesn't work, right? They're like, there doesn't need to be a third thing. The third thing is number, like they're thinking very abstractly. They're thinking very logically. And to their credit, they are taking Marx at his word. Marx seems to believe he's just processing a purely logical argument. And like I said before, I don't know if it works like that, but I do think when you're talking about an emergent system, it does suggest that there is a common unit.
Okay. What do we, not to be overly complicated. Hi, this is Varn from SR.
Hey, what's up, Derek?
That's symptomatic redness for those who don't know.
Yeah, I'm representing the SR contingent today, since somebody couldn't make it, and I just happen to be around, and I've read this book. What do we mean, Lexi? What do we mean by logics here? Because Marx isn't using a standard analytic notion of logic. I mean, he's operating with a Hegelian assumptions, which actually, as a process, will only define like components. Anything like axiomatically, it describes everything else. That's how it works.
Yeah, no, that's true. I'm using logic imperialistically to just mean like analytical, mathematical, binary logic, like the kind that a lawyer would use to try to get through the bar or the LSAT. You know what I mean? Like,
well, it's the idea of theorem, of definition, theorem, corollary, or corollary. The kind of mathematical way.
Yeah,
or that's how I was using it with Andrew, and that's what he said back anyway.
Well, and that's why the reason I say this is because I think that Andrew, I think, believes that it goes through using that standard of logic, not the Hegelian like unfolding standard of logic, which is what I was trying to get at by talking about the real abstraction.
I'm going to say that I don't think, now again, I'm speaking about someone who doesn't talk to me anymore, but that I don't think Andrew sees a difference between the science of logic and mathematical logic, because he also thinks to understand Marx, you must understand the science of logic. I mean, he said you could approach a text without it, but it really clarifies.
So, but Hegel thinks of that mathematical formal logic that I was calling logic as, a smaller part of a greater project, as like a square within the rectangles.
Right, and he also dismissed the dialectical study of math as not dialectical enough. I mean, I get that.
Hegel?
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway.
Simon's position on the third thing argument, just read his article on it. It's on his website. We can link to it. He is not doing some sort of weird Hegelian stuff, metaphysical nonsense. He does run with the same kind of idea of logic as Tom does, as I do, as Alexi's bar exam lawyer does. It's really a simple Aristotelian argument, and so there's no weird Hegelian stuff going on.
Well, we should take a look at that and perhaps continue our discussion on this another time.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I don't want to cut it down, but it was just like something that I had difficulty was wondering about why exactly he was saying that and whether I agreed with it at the time. But I think everybody else got it more than I did. But I think I have it now. I think though, I don't know too much about Hegel's science of logic, so I can't really comment. But I think we should probably move on, unless Derek, you think we're cutting you short.
No, you're not cutting me short. I think honestly, there's some hyper slipperiness in the way we're using the term logic, and it's actually crucial to Kleiman's argument. And I've always suspected that there's a shift, that there's some kind of shift going on there, because lawyers' logic isn't logic. It's not actually an absolute proof. It's an informal thing. Mathematical logic isn't the same thing either.
Well, I'm talking about the kind of, like, I'm not talking about just pragmatics in the LSAT, right? I'm talking about, like, well, if you take mathematical logic, it is the formalization of the Frege, Russell, Wittgenstein tradition, right? To be more specific.
But that isn't a tradition. There's not a coherent answer to that tradition in logics. Like if you study and you and I both studied analytical philosophy,
yes,
we both know there's not actually one answer to that tradition. So,
no. Yes, I understand what you're saying, but like Euclidean geometry, there is a dominant way that people use this stuff.
Yeah. I get it.
A very obvious, big, specific one that people use most of the time. And that's the one I was trying to get at by saying, and you're right, the LSAT lawyer is being a bit more pragmatic than doing a mathematical logic class. But I think in comparison to Hegelian logic, those things are close enough.
I mean, I don't think we can answer this for this question right now. And I'm coming in, having read the book, but I was not part of the last conversation, so I'm gonna end it off. But my one point is, Kleiman's main argument to me was that logically, also using the principle of charity, if something is logically consistent, then you must accept that it is possible, but if we're playing with different notions of logic, the notion of consistency actually becomes a real problem.
I don't think any of this is about playing with different ideas of logic. I think they're all operating on exactly the same type of logic, which is the one that people associate normally with just normal mathematical theorem proof type logic.
Well, then we'll have to read the third thing paper and see if it actually holds, because I don't know that I have never actually seen how you could logically square that circle.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think it matters if the third thing argument logically holds, because I think it describes something real.
And the other thing I'd say is that, like, I think that why he's saying this specifically here is for some reason, for some argument that I'm not aware of, to do with value form, and he's making it quite explicit what he thinks are the definitions, and I think that's why he's doing it.
So here's just my fifth thing on the fourth thing on the third thing, comma the
oh, God.
Here's Kleiman in the introduction to the paper that I think will sort of clarify what is meant by logic. He says, in contrast to both these views, I regard Marx's argument as a sound deductive argument in which the intrinsic values is derived more than a couple of unnecessary meanings of a step-by-step explication of the logical structure of the first paragraph of the third thing argument. So there you go.
So it is deductive Aristotelian logic. Got it. We can move on.
Okay. Let's start from where we left off last week, and hopefully we haven't totally made everybody's head explode with that discussion. Now, Lexi, I said before we started that you could start this because I couldn't remember what it was. So we're on chapter 2.1.7 now, and it's the distinctions between value and price.
Yeah, this is where Andrew starts introducing one of his most important concepts, is this idea of a quantitative difference, potential quantitative difference between price and value. But the first thing he wants to get out of the way is that, look, there's another distinction here, is that we can measure value not only in the money price, but in labor time, and in order to compare like to like, in order to compare labor times to money prices, there needs to be some kind of conversion factor, which we'll get into. But what he wants to say in particular is that these two distinctions, this value measure and the potential quantitative differences between price and value, these things are nothing to do with each other. These distinctions are not the same. And the reason why he wants to say that is because he thinks price and value are a single system. And so, in this single system, he still believes, of course, that you can articulate it as price or as money price or as labor time. He makes an additional kind of distinction within quantitative difference where for a firm or industry's output, value is the sum of value produced and price is the sum of value received. And then within a single commodity, value is the commodity's actual value determined by labor time. And then the price is the sum of money that commodity's owner can sell for it. So that's a potential quantitative difference between price and value that he says has nothing to do with the difference in measuring labor time and money price as different, units of measurement.
Does anybody have any issues with what is said there? No. Anybody? Alex, what do you make of that?
No, I think that's pretty solid. yeah, so my understanding is it values the labor hours embodied in a commodity. Price is the money that the capitalist receives in exchange for the good. So yeah, just I think Lexi did a good job on that part there.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to say as well is one thing that Lexi was saying there was about the single system versus the dual system. When we get later on into it, that can sound all airy-fairy to people when they hear these things, but it's really just a way of writing the exact same. It's like you can write in labor time and you can write in prices what happened in production and the outputs. And the next thing we're going to see here is called the melt, and that's how we're going to be able to convert from labor time into labor time into prices. So when it comes to the melt, there's some different ways of calculating it, but let me just get here what Andrew just said to me was where is my internet gone? Here we go. Let's see, do we have stuff here in the melt? The economy-wide ratio of total money price of output to total labor time value of output. Okay, so the melt is an average of money to labor time. Okay, now, does anybody want to talk about this? Does anybody want to talk any more about this? Certainly with respect to what other schools seem to have problems with it. Okay, well, some of the other schools have so when we get later on, they seem to have problems with this idea of the monetary expression of labor time, that it's always a function of the previous monetary expression of labor time. Actually, let's not get into that. Well, do people have any problems with the actual idea of a melt? Do people think it's a reasonable scientific measure?
Well, when I look at the footnote for 218, he says it's the reciprocal of the amount of labor a unit of money commands. So it's sort of how much money is able to command labor, and to me that just makes sense at a kind of common sense level. But I'm not really across all the debates.
We'll get to them much later, I think, when we get down to some of the nitty-gritty. But to me, it seems like a very reasonable scientific measure. Not even it's more an accounting measure, really. It's the number of hours worked in an economy divided by the price of the economy. And
as we'll see later, total prices in the aggregate are going to equal total labor hours in the aggregate.
No, not total.
Total values. Sorry, I should say.
Yeah.
Total prices equals total values. Sorry. Yeah.
What I remember when Lexi was talking to me about this before. Lexi, you thought that this seems like it's a very accounted empirically provable, but you suspected that it's actually much harder to pin down than it seems. Would you go back into why you thought that? Because this is actually how I read Marx kind of intuitively, and when I read this, I was like, oh, I finally have a way to understand how to articulate that. But will you go into that a little bit, Lexi?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think I would have said empirically, but it rationally makes sense, right? Like this, this stands to reason that if value, the substance of value is determined by socially necessary labor time, and that this socially necessary labor time gets expressed in price, then I can see no reason why you wouldn't be able to look at the price system, math out some kind of multiplier, some kind of conversion factor, and translate from price to labor time. So I think it stands to reason that something like the melt must exist. And the reason that I had any sense of doubt that this is the absolute right approach comes more from a survey of the literature than anything else. When reading this, I mean, it seems to be a fairly sophisticated, just sophisticated enough, right? You end up with a 2x2 matrix of your price and value figures.
Let's see it. Okay, I'll put it on the screen here now. Yeah.
Yeah, at top of page 26, table 2.1. You have the value of output. W is value of output produced. P is price of output, value received. So yeah, I'm not like particularly skeptical about this, but this is the fulcrum of a lot of skepticism, right? Like I was talking to Dave Zachariah, the guy who is kind of in the cockshot tradition, right? And this is what he said to me about it. The fundamental conceptual problem is this. In real capitalist market economies, unit prices of commodities fluctuate across time and space, even when the conditions of production are unchanged. What relation, if any, will labor time have to fluctuating prices? The Melt approach of converting random prices into units of average labor is really no different than Adam Smith's notion of labor commanded. Just divide prices by the average wage rate, and you will get the equivalent amount of labor that you could hire for that price. Why would that fundamentally be any better or worse than dividing by Melt? You end up with a notion of exploitation similar to Robertus. Workers are cheated by the hour. All the theoretical advantages of classical Marxian labor values go out the window. And so that's, that's from the cockshot side of things. And then on the other hand, again, I think we've touched on this. We'll touch on it again. The value formers seem to think that there's a more fundamental transformation happening between the worlds of value and price. I think from Andrew's point of view, that these might be thought of as like dual system interpretations of Marx's value theory. But you can see how prominent, and across like the spectrums of hyper mathematical to, humanities supremacist, you know what I mean?
Well, can I say something here? Like one of the things that we're trying to do here is to try and figure out whether the TSSI is consistent, and has it got logical problems? And from my point of view, looking at the Melt, there's no problem with it. I can't see any problem with it as a scientific measure.
Yeah, and to sort of briefly bring up a point about the sort of Paul Cockshotian. Oh God, that just sounds horrible. Econophysicist.
Yeah, econophysics.
Yeah.
Should we maybe
coming from that perspective, Paul Cockshott explicitly argues that there's no difference between Ricardo's theory of value, labor theory of value, and Marx's. So, for that person that you're bringing up to argue in that tradition that, the Melt formula basically loses what makes Marx's, theory of value unique in comparison to the rest of classical political economy, there's a sort of irony to that when you have people like Paul Cockshott basically arguing that there's no difference between Ricardo and Marx in terms of their theories of value.
Yeah, similarly, the Adam Smith school critiques would be kind of strange too, because they argue that there's very little or no difference between Adam Smith and Marx. I'm thinking about some of the world systems theorist economic works as opposed to their political ones. So yeah, I mean, so far this makes good. I'm going to add a qualification though, just as a hermeneutic, and it's something that I think is not addressed. It doesn't just have to be logical and consistent to be a proper interpretation. It also has to be logical, consistent, and the only logically consistent proper interpretation to actually solve the problem. If it's not, then you have what are essentially arbitrary paradigms, but it can't be arbitrary. So there is more than just logical consistency on the table.
Yeah, I don't think Dave's critique here makes a lot of sense. I mean, Marx is really clear that total prices equal total labor. in the long. And to me, it seems that that interpretation is only possible if you do some kind of interpretation of Marx that I have never been able to understand where it comes from. But that Marx is saying that exchange value and value are two completely different things. I haven't found any sort of textual support for that. My 2 times around Capital Volume 1, but it seems to me that you really need to regard prices as, i.e., exchange value, as something very, very different from value. I think the melt, or MELT, monetary expression of labor time, Kleiman made a reference to a guy called Ramos, who was apparently, according to Kleiman, the first one to sort of explicate this concept. And I've been trying to track that paper down, and I finally did. And I found a quote here in the original paper that might be useful to someone. If you'd like me to read it, I could. It's just yeah.
Whereabouts in that paper is it? And I'll see if I can get it up here on the screen for people.
Yeah, sure. So I'll send you the link.
I think it's in the messenger already. Was it? Did you send it previously?
Yeah, the one I sent. Yeah,
the week.
I'm going to send it again just to have it right in front of you.
Okay.
So he's saying.
I have it here. I have it here. Okay, so let me see if I can.
This is Alejandro Ramos Martinez, right?
What page is it on?
Page 10.
Okay.
So page 10, first paragraph.
Okay, here we go. 1 second there, so people can.
Let's see if we.
Okay, put rigorously. Is that it?
Yeah, that one. Put rigorously. Social labor and money are not two mutually exclusive measures of value, but two aspects of the same measure. Value is simultaneously measured in both social labor and money. In this sense, value has a twofold measure, the MEL. So this is presumably before it became known as MELT or something. The MEL is a result of the total social labor spent in production and the amount of money in which this labor is objectified as value, i.e. that it's objectified in commodity, and realized as value form, i.e. the value is realized when it's paid for, or as in price. So the value form thing here being essentially a price tag. The MEL is hence the amount of money in which 1 unit of socially necessary labor time is objectified. Which is basically just saying total labor equals total prices, but in a I think more sort of rigorous, but also very Marxian way. Might be somewhat inaccessible to people not familiar with Marxist, intra-Marxist lingo, but I think this paragraph makes a whole lot of sense, at least to me.
So it removes a lot of the classical value form critiques.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's
wrong.
Right. I mean, like this is as much as I like trying to figure out what Rubens meant. I do think this is pretty convincing. That at least in a way, because one of the things the value forms critique do, it makes the idea of falsifying any part of the Marxist project by any standard almost impossible. Because value becomes this like highly reified, almost mystified thing that you can never pin down to one thing, that only has multifarious forms that don't work in a single system. And that's maddening, trying to figure out how you'd even deal with that. Like, what would that even mean?
Yeah, and the funny thing is, I know I said that they're kind of like dual system before, but actually, when I'm thinking about it, I think they're they're like Marxological enough to recognize that value and price are a single system, but they still have that mystification about it, which is even actually more, kind of woo.
Okay, well, we're going to get there in a few minutes. Will we keep going with value and price rates of profit? I think we've all kind of said we think that the melt is, or the mel. I much prefer the idea of the mel. We have Machini and Mel. We're going to redefine all of it. We're going to introduce Plumbush and Schlieb next chapter.
Yeah. Simoleons, all currency in simoleons.
Absolutely. So chapter 2.1.9, value and price rates of profit. Alex, do you want to go through this one maybe?
Yeah, not a problem. So so what we've got here, Kleiman's defining the different ways of measuring rate of profit. So you've got the value rate of profit, so surplus value over total capital advanced. The other way is to measure as there's the price rate of profit, which I think he's expressing as pi over C. That's the total profit over the total capital advanced. Now, I think what he's trying to do is establish this idea of the general rate of profit, which is then going to lead him up to the prices of production. I think I want to defer to someone who's got a bit more of a mathematical background on this one, I think.
Okay. Well, so we just say that Marx is making the claim that the value rate of profit and the price rate of profit are equal. We don't have. Does anybody have any problems with that?
No.
No. Okay. So everybody understands that the rate of profit in money terms, you might have a sum of money, maybe £10,000 profit over £100,000 invested would be 10%. And when you look at the value rate, so you look at the surplus that the capitalist gets, might be 1,000 hours over 10,000 hours of capital put through the system and wages. And so the value rate is 10% and the price rate are both the same. That's all that he's saying here.
Okay, yep.
Okay, so let's try 2.1.10, the tendency of profit rates to equalize. Rosa, do you want to do one, or are you still trying to catch up and reading on the different bits? Is Rosa alive?
Yeah. I'm still trying to catch up on that sort of thing.
Okay.
And I don't want to make a fool of myself.
You can leave that to me. So the tendency of profit rates to equalize. So this is the idea that capital, if you've got a very, very profitable business, a new business comes up, and the rate of profit is extremely high, or the rate of surplus is extremely high in it, that other capitalists will notice that these guys are, becoming as rich as who's very rich, somebody rich, and that they will start to compete with that person and migrate their capital slowly towards that other business. And there is a tendency for these rates of profit to get diminished. And so the idea is that throughout the entire industry, throughout the entire economy, profit rates will have a tendency to equalize. Now, the actual empirical evidence for this one shows that there is still a lot of variance at any time in an economy, but that things are moving. Certain industries maybe over time will go towards the same rate of profit, but then new industries pop up, and so this is all and always churning. But the idea is that capital is attracted to the profitable industries.
Right. Can I just point out one thing here before we move on to the next thing, because it's something that I missed the first time I read it, but I think it's really important, because he's going to show why this particular thing is true in the next paragraph or subchapter and the next table. So what he says is not that the rates of profit, the different rates of profit will equalize. He's saying this process tends to eliminate differentials among the price rates of profit. The price thing there is super important because in just a few lines and on the next page, he's going to show us how price rates of profit for an industry may differ significantly or even enormously from their value rate of profit, and show us why
very
they're
important.
Different things. So the thing that's equalized, it's not the value rate of profit that's equalized, it's the price rate of profit. That's the only thing that will equalize, because I suppose if value rates of profit could equalize, then that would essentially mean that all industries would be equally labor intensive, which is just blatantly silly. So I think that's just an important detail.
I have a question about that, and this may be getting us off track, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot, because one of the distorting factors that Kleiman mentioned in a speech once was that monopoly forms of capital, i.e. intellectual property, and I don't mean monopoly capital the way a lot of Leninists do, but I mean literally like intellectual property would be a distorting factor. But I couldn't figure out the exact relationship he was referring to. And is it related to this price versus value rate difference?
Yes.
Yeah, you would say so?
Yeah, it's related to why price and value are two different things, but not necessarily, totally independent. He actually brought up in the Reading Capital Closely course that he taught. He brought up that specific example of intellectual property rights and so on in the case of software, for instance.
It's interesting to me because it would explain something that been troubling me for years, is why national economies do not have a high productive sector, or a relationship tangentially to a high productive sector like Britain. Can't just do IP stuff to generate value, because essentially it seems like they should be able to, if there's no relationship, and there is no evidence that they can.
But
they can command profits. We'll see in the next table something that I think might shed some light on your question, Derek. That you can create very, very little value but still receive a lot of profit. And you can generate a tiny amount of surplus value but still bring in hordes of cash. And when you look at the actual bookkeeping and actual accounting, it looks like you're having a high rate of profit, which you have in price terms, but you're not actually creating all that much value.
So that would explain things like the Bezoses of the world, essentially, and a lot of paper wealth.
Well, yes. Bezos is probably doing a lot of he's got a lot of capital invested, so I wouldn't think he's got a high rate of profit. Amazon never make I don't think they make any profit. So he's not an example of it. But but
we're conflating price
so we're trying to
rate and value rate again. IP. I mean, like
no, but you're talking about you're trying to talk about Amazon is not really a profitable company. It's trying to create a monopoly. But
he's able to capitalize on a lot of paper wealth himself. So what explains that? Does this explain that?
Specifically Bezos, not Amazon.
Yeah, so let's talk about. So we're confusing some things here, like intellectual property. Like Derek, it's not like Britain can just say, "Oh, we'll just create loads of IP and we'll just get loads of profit that way and not have to create firms." Like the thing is, you have to get that IP. It has to be good IP. It has to be IP that's going to be worth something. It's got to be actually a good piece of software that people want. It's not a trivial thing to just say.
But software is not a commodity because the labor value. I'm going to say something because the labor value invested is almost none after its creation.
Completely. But you still have to be able to create a piece of software that everybody wants to use, and you have to be able to then generate a rent off it.
So it's a form of rent seeking, right? But I'm just wondering if this whole rent seeking and there's this whole other thing about the ability to actually enforce IP, which requires a fairly advanced state in a very physical and direct way. I mean, like they have to be able to actually enforce the law with a gun.
Also, there's like the price of like continuous updates that need to be done by like programmers and that sort of thing.
So there is still commodity, but like I'm not want to get us distracted on it. I just have always wondered.
Wow.
Well, we're distracted on it, but I've just wondered about if this distinction that Emmanuel made is a key to that, because I used to beat my head up around what I was missing on the relation.
Like it actually doesn't matter if it is rent or if it's not rent in this case. For the logical implications of this, we don't care what's happening to these different two companies, whether they're doing it through IP or they're doing it just through some other mechanism. We don't actually care. There's two companies. One's got it labor intensive and one's not. They'll equalize regardless of whether one is IP or rent or whatever else is happening in the background. I think we should just kind of put that to the side, because it's not actually relevant to the logical discussion, but it is like something we want to talk about, but not here.
But that's what I wanted to say, is that we're dealing at a much higher level of abstraction here. We're not even talking about like rentier dynamics.
Exactly.
And that kind of stuff. Like we're not even there yet.
Yeah.
We're not even there yet. But it is a good point. I don't want to say it's not a good point.
No, it's a great point, because and especially like monopoly is one of the major distorting factors in markets. Like, absolutely. So yeah, it's a perfectly relevant point, and it's one of the many reasons that prices don't exactly line up with values in the way you'd expect if they're part of a single system.
So okay. I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead. Yeah,
I was just going to say let's look at this example that Emmanuel was going at, and we can look at it and we can talk about what might cause these different things in reality. How about that?
So we've got the chemical industry versus the restaurant industry. And so the restaurant industry is going to be a lot more labor intensive, whereas the chemical industry, for every dollar that goes towards an employee, maybe $5 goes towards machinery, towards equipment, and yet despite this differing organic composition, they're still going to have a similar rate of profit over the long run. There's a kind of a tendency for capitalists to seek out profitable or surplus generating businesses, and that over time creates a tendency towards equalization.
In the price rate of production of profit. I mean, because
that's correct. The price rate of profit. Yeah.
All right.
So has anybody got like page 28 open? We got the table there. I have it up on the.
Yeah, I'm looking straight at it.
Yeah. So if you look there at this, I'll just talk through it. We've got the capital C is for the capital invested, and then we've got K is the, oh my God, what is K?
Cost price, is it?
Yeah.
The cost price. Yeah. And then we got surplus. S is the surplus. So we see there the two industries. One has got 200 in capital. Because they're only employing a very little amount of labor, they have probably a small amount of surplus. So they've 8. So you've only got a surplus value rate of profit of 4%, and the other one has 40% in the restaurant. It makes sense. A restaurant doesn't have a massive chemical plant, and it probably still has quite a lot of staff. But when we equalize the profit, if we do the price of production, that's the pi over C, I presume, we have 8% in both. So we see that we are able to equalize both in industries. Now, the chemical industry might be doing that by having a patent on the drug that they're actually producing, and they might be able to get the extra bit because of their patent, or some other way, or it might work its way out through the market. Maybe they have a monopoly. Who knows how it's actually operating, getting it? But there is this tendency for the rate of profit to equalize across these different types of industries.
The way I see it, even though the restaurant industry is creating more surplus value, the chemical industry is siphoning it off. It's reallocating it. That surplus value.
Yes, that's so. The reason I thought this table was amazing is that I think it really shines light on what one thing that's, I think, really important to the TSSI, and that's the sequence of how stuff is determined, right? So look at this. When I looked at this table the first time, I sort of stared at it and I was sort of confused why you couldn't, start from the right-hand side and work your way to the left-hand side. Why can't you start from P and move to C, etc.? But this really sort of helps to make sense of the fact that the first thing that's determined is S over C, right? So this is a sequential argument as well, because the total, the general rate of profit, i.e., the total rate of profit in value terms, in this case, the bottom line of S over C, which is 48 divided by 300 in this case. Once we know that, and the assumption is that, total price rate of profit will have the total pi over C and S over C have to be equal.
Yeah.
So once we have S over C, that then will determine pi over C. And under these assumptions, that means that regardless of how much value one industry actually produces, the price received by them will be determined by the
value.
The S over C, the general rate of profit. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a sequential argument. It's almost like a causal argument.
Yeah.
And you can see that once this happens, the sole determining factor really is how much capital is advanced. Pi over C equalizes over all industries. Then the pi over C will be constant. So the one thing that changes, if you look at pi, what their actual profits are, you look at chemical and the restaurant. The one thing that determines how much profits they make is how much capital is advanced. I thought that's a really profound insight that if price rates of profit tend to equalize, the greater profits will go to the more capital intensive operations. And I thought that explains a whole lot of things that is going on in the actual economy.
Yeah, it does explain. Actually, this makes sense of some things I used to think about. Like when you work in the restaurant industry, the profit margin seems low, but it shouldn't be because it's labor intensive. But that makes sense when you look at when you're just thinking about it only in terms of an equalization of price waste over time. Like it's clear. You're right.
I just like to look at this economy so we can take loads of drugs from the chemical industry and then go for a party in the restaurant.
I find it pretty helpful to talk through these mathematical examples, because when you're just looking at a volley of numbers, it's like, okay, these numbers add up.
Yeah, well,
what do those letters mean again?
Even I've read this and I've read the explanation of it, but only sitting now talking about it has this actually struck me as being super important.
Yeah.
It's very, very important. And talking about the melt, when we really get into the melt, I was reading a paper during the week by Alan Potts. I think he's written a book with Kleiman on the whole debate, a series of papers called "Is Marx's Theory of Profit Right?" And he does some ones of surplus and of price and value, the single system, and showing them how you can transform them all in one go and how they all equalize. And it makes the whole thing really simple. It makes the whole controversy look as simple as that table. It's a little bit more complicated, but pretty much. And when we get to we're talking around these things of single system and dual systems and all this stuff, bit of a head wrecker, but we want to be spending our time looking at these tables and picking them apart, because I think that's where we really see what's going on. Is there anybody? Do we want to say any more about that, or will we move on?
Yeah, I just generally when I initially read this, I didn't really understand what they were talking about in terms of what they meant by equalize, in terms of why the basically, like, I didn't understand that it was meant to explain why the restaurant industry isn't like producing more value than like the chemical industry, isn't like more profitable than the chemical industry, even though it's more labor intensive. I didn't really understand that until like having like the sort of discussion and that sort of thing like helped me explain it. And I think it highlights like the general utility of having like sort of reading groups and that kind of thing to like rely on when you're reading harder texts like this and like Capital and that sort of thing. Like it's generally harder to study alone than to like have like a reading group when dealing with like books like this, I guess.
I think
Yeah, most
Marxists,
definitely.
yeah, Marxists are usually pretty good at that when it comes to like humanities texts coming together and trying to talk about it. But it's pretty rare that we do it with math, and I think it's maybe more important because a lot of us, like maybe not in this particular group, but a lot of Marxists are pretty rusty with math. Like
knuckleheads.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm absolutely
Guilty.
shit at math.
I'm just beyond enumerate. I took some calc
Yep.
classes.
I can barely tell the time.
I can do statistics, and that's about it. So
Okay.
Did we break down the aggregate equalities?
Yeah, so that's important.
Yep.
Let's talk about these. So these are the aggregates. So I'll highlight the aggregates. Total profit and total surplus both equal 48. So we see there pi is 48 profit and total surplus is 48s. And total price of production and total value both equal 118. So these are the two guys over here. This is W and P, like he goes on to say, Marx attached great importance to these three aggregate equalities, holding that they confirmed his value theory. In the aggregate, the production of value and surplus value does determine price, profit, and the rate of profit. That's important. It determines the price, the profit, and the rate of profit. That's very important. Yeah, we should see, especially in chapter 9, critics have persistently denied for almost 100 years these aggregates hold true. Okay,
And,
so
this is why I really push the thing that you have to read this from left to right because it's a sequence. So
yeah,
that's
a very good point.
He doesn't take profits first, right? He doesn't make the argument that, oh, we look objectively in the real world and we see that the restaurant brings in $16 million or whatever this is worth of profits. He does it the other way around. What determines the value of pi? What determines the price and the profits that they receive? The determinant is the thing that's to the left, which is pi over c. How do we know what pi over c? How do we know what pi over c is? Well, we add up all of the surplus, 40 plus 48, divided by all of the capital. So as soon as we know the capital advanced and we know how much surplus value is created, this is a really sort of super strong argument, and I think really big claim is that the profits, the price that they receive, the thing you actually see on the books, is determined by the general rate of profit.
Yeah.
I would
huge, man. Like because the intuition is, what determines the profit is just like how successful you are in the market and how much is in the register at the end of the day. But the TSSI claim here is that the profits are sort of determined later on in the process. The thing that really matters is S over C, and once you have that, then everything else sort of clicks into place.
I would go so far as to say that it's the TSSI is probably better to say it's what Marx says. And I think when we look at this example here and we look at how it's saying the logic flows and determines the setup of how value forum says it, to me is like, fair enough, people can come up with their own theories in that, but it's an entirely separate theory that the determination for me is clear. What do people think about that? Is that too bolshy?
Oh, you're right.
I would. I think I agree. I think the biggest tendency that people are going to have on accepting this is A, they're not going to understand the math, which hopefully after listening to this they will, and B, the language is slightly different than the language Marx uses. Not I don't. Well, I mean, I think all the categories are from Marx, but because of the way Marx structures his argument, because he doesn't, Marx doesn't do, like, if you go through the Capitals Volume 1, 2, and 3, it's not like you're starting off with the aggregate tables to prove the point. You're actually getting a historical description of how this could have arrived. Like, literally, that's how it works, starting with the commodity assumptions.
Yeah.
So, like, I could see how a reader would look at this and then remember their experience of reading Capital and think it was different. I'm approaching this philologically right now, but I think as an actual mathematical argument, this is sound. This also makes things testable in a way that, like, value form isn't. You just can't.
Yeah.
And that doesn't sound like Marx to me.
No, Marx is a scientist, so this is very, and he's also doing maths all over the place, particularly in the later volumes. So, what doesn't appear at all in volume 1 appears in volume 2 and 3, and most people never get there.
So did we explicitly spell out what the aggregate equalities are? Because he kind of goes over it, and it just, I so rarely actually hear this spelled out that I just want to run through it just one more time. It's the total profit equals the total surplus value. The total price of production equals the total value.
Yeah.
And the economy-wide price rate of profit equals economy-wide value rate of profit. And the first two are consequences of the last. And according to Kleiman, Marx thought they confirmed Marx's value theory, right? Which I think that's an interesting comment, in the sense that I feel like these are like not confirmations, but the sort of like, assumptions. Like, I see, again, we're getting into this, this debate between what's the axiom and what's the conclusion being argued for here. Which,
I think these are the conclusions, pretty much. The first two qualities are consequences of the latter. Yeah. So, these to me are deductions in reality for me. So I don't have any problems with understanding that logical progression.
Even methodologically, if you looked at the text, Marx is not like, if they were axioms, I kind of tended to believe, like, the commodity definition is axiomatic, like, it's defined. It's also, but like, these things are consequences and conclusions of that, not axiomatic definitions. I mean, otherwise he would just state. I mean, I really think Marx would have just stated them. Like, he wasn't like he's classic. I mean, he was classically educated. It's not like he didn't know how to make an axiomatic argument.
No, but Marx, I think people are right to say that Marx is reluctant to do so when he's arguing. Whereas Engels is much more comfortable with that writing style.
Yeah, but I mean, in so much there's a difference between Marx and Engels that is important. It is often the difference between stating something deductively and starting axiomatically, because it actually does have consequences in the political realm.
Yeah.
Okay. Are we good to go on to the next session, the tendential fall in the rate of profit? Who wants to give this a go? Who's here?
Alex, give it a go.
Alex.
Yeah, I interrupted Alex before. So
the tendential fall in the rate of profit. So basically, as capitalists introduce labor-saving technologies into the workplace, there's fewer and fewer dollars spent on variable capital as a ratio of the initial capital advance. So, put it in layman's terms, there's more machines in the workplace, fewer workers. Now, if we hold that the total rate of the only thing that can produce value in the economy is workers' labor power, if there's fewer laborers involved, then the rate of profit will fall. Did anyone have anything to add or correct anything I've just said then?
There's a quote in the chapter here. I just highlighted it. I find what you can see on the screen, which I think is Marx is,
yes,
he's a goddamn genius when he can put things like this. The progressive tendency for the rate of profit to fall is thus simply the expression peculiar to the capitalist mode of production of the progressive development of the social productivity of labor. That is a hell of a quote.
Yeah, because basically what's happening is you're decreasing socially necessary labor time all the time. So you're also decreasing the amount of labor inputted, and thus it would. But it's really. Sorry, Guitar, keep going. No, I just want to explain the logic because this is really elegant, but like there's a very elaborate logic that relates to the entire other volumes of Capital that you kind of have to for it to really work. Because this is actually an argument against people like Stephen King who talk about the fact that Marx supposedly don't consider the effects of, what do they say, that we don't consider the effects of
let's not give Steve Keen any airing on this because he's a hack.
Okay,
when it comes to Marx.
Hey.
Well, I mean, I agree, but I mean that's the common argument is there's a total disregard for technology, and I'm like, no, it's absolutely essential to why this happens, because if there's less and less human labor power, there's less and less ability to abstract surplus rents, and everything's going to eventually fall at cost. So
this just violates every bourgeois intuition about how technology works.
Does it though?
I mean, like maybe not now, but when you look at like in the consciousness when you're watching Black Mirror or something. But I'm more mean in models. Like again, the way that people were modeling
productivity of capital, productivity of capital and the costs,
input-output matrices, like it was sort of, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but it looked like it was analytically the case that the rate of profit really couldn't fall between periods, like in these models, so that even someone like Robert Brenner, again, a lot of respect for him, but the way that he was modeling this stuff, it seemed like from you couldn't have like a fall in the rate of profit due to technological change. I think this, I don't know. I think this is
But I think empirically, like historically, it's like clearly true, though. I mean, like if you look at GDP growth rates, as you develop technology, GDP growth rates drop like a mofo.
I mean, look, I think that, and I think it's true, but in a lot of modeling, and including the Schraffian kind of modeling, Ian Steedman kind of stuff, and what he calls like what does he call them? Physicalists or whatever. Like, it's a and maybe it's just because I don't understand it, but it does seem like there's just an assumption that makes that like impossible. Like,
they'd say that well, their rate of profit is a physical rate of profit. So if their output is increased, their profit rate goes up. But in reality, we see the profit rates, the price profit rates in the real world go down. So it leads one to think that their analysis empirically is not good.
Well, and again, this is one of those things that's why I keep throwing qualifiers in. I really don't understand how these modeling assumptions are thought of as neutral.
Well, they're not. I mean, I used to think about this too, and I would think about libertarians who would talk about how prices always go down, yet profits will inevitably always go up. That never made any sense to me. And they would argue that as a benefit of capitalism. Like look, the point that the consumer is going to get lower and lower and lower, but the profits are going to go up and up and up. How? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I think also like this bombshell of a quote sort of also puts the finger on where value production and use value production are in contradiction, and what's good for society is not necessarily good for the capitalist class. Yeah, so absolutely. Like the progressive development of the social productivity of labor is a good thing. right? I think Marx thinks that. I think everyone who's, you know, not a primitivist thinks that. And he's saying that the tendency for the rate of profit to fall is just the expression, like in peculiar to the capitalist mode of production. So it is only in capitalism where a good thing for the, you know, the society and the economy as a whole is a bad thing for capitalists. This is only true in a very specific form of production, and I think that's a really sort of, man, that's solid. You know,
And that's brilliant, because it also makes it very clear the distinctions between other modes of productions, which, you know, lately I've been reading around on Piketty, and he can't explain like the difference between feudal and capitalist growth cycles because he assumes they're the same market. I mean, they work on the same assumptions, and this makes it very clear that they're not. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, they don't have that technological drive, you know, which.
Yeah, it's not just they don't have that
rate
technological drive. They also don't have the technological drive specifically to generate surplus value, which, you know, is another contradiction there. But I mean, like, because if you are directly investing your surplus into expropriation, which, you know, so I can physically take more stuff from you, which is what feudal society generally did when they had a surplus, you can't grow economically at all.
Well, also they put it into building castles and palaces and stuff like that. You know, the idea of increasing, you know, anyway, let's not get into that. But it's true. If anybody wants to see, on a side note, Steve Keen getting his ass handed to him, talking about MMT economics, they can watch him take on Warren Mosler in a debate on YouTube, where it was goddamn painful to see him fall and flat in his face. But moving swiftly onwards.
Oh boy.
It was very enjoyable. But
yeah. Can you link that in the chat, by the way?
I will. I'll try and find it now. So
I just want to say I appreciate Steve Keen's relentless takedown of bourgeois economics.
That is good. And I will say I'll give him credit where it's due. But if you actually read his book on that one, what was his book on? I can't remember what it's called. But
Debunking Economics.
Yeah. He's terrible on Marx. Absolutely terrible.
Well, I was cringing through Nothing to Lose But Their Minds, because it should have been called Nothing to Lose But Their Brains. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's the zombie world we live in. But he had, like, in that book, it's like 250 pages on neoclassical, and like it's very noticeable that he didn't do anything on say Austrian or any of these, but he devoted 30 or 40 pages to Marx.
To be fair, like, Austrian economics kind of don't really matter outside of their influence on neoclassical economics back in the day.
But neither does. But in the broad sector of things, Marxist economics doesn't matter now either. But the thing is that it's obvious from him that you know, Marx is an actual thinker, and he's a target, and that's why he gave a target to that as a post-Keynesian.
Marxism Marxism is sort of the third big school, and Steve Keen is a post-Marxist. He's an ex-Marxist. He wants to be a dialectical Keynesian.
He's a Keynesian. He's a post-Keynesian. He's not a Marxist.
But he was a Marxist.
Yeah, but Thomas Sowell claims I've been a Marxist too, so we can ignore that claim. Let's move on.
Let's move on. There's something here I want to go into here, the next part of this one, where he talks. Okay, let's have a look at this. He talks about how we can understand this. So let's have a look at this formula here. Okay, so everybody see this formula where he talks about. So let me read some of this. According to the theory that value is determined by labor time, it's workers' living labor that adds all new value. Moreover, as we have seen, an average hour of labor always yields the same amount of value, independent of variations in productivity, which is Marx's way of expressing the tendency of productivity to reduce prices. Technological innovation causes a fall in the amount of new value created per dollar of advanced capital. Given a constant rate of exploitation, rate of surplus value, the amount of surplus value created per dollar of advanced capital, in other words, the rate of profit necessarily falls as well. So he lays out this equation here, where we have S over C. So that's the value rate of profit, and then we have the rate of exploitation. Is equal to S over V over C. Okay. So it's the rate of exploitation multiplied by what? it's the rate of surplus value, sorry, multiplied by the percentage of variable capital ordered to hire workers. So,
Yep. Has everyone followed on that?
I think I've got that.
All right, cool.
So let's have a look. If the rate of surplus value is 2, okay, so 200%. So for every hour of, for every 3 hours of labor, you're only getting paid 1 hour of labor. So that's 2%. And 20% of the capital is advanced to hired workers. Okay, then it's 2 times 20%, which is 40%. Okay, so the rate of profit then in that scenario would be 40%. But if the rate of technological change increases and the percentage of capital advance used to hire workers, say, goes from 20% down to 10%, then and the rate of exploitation is the same, the rate of profit is halved down to 20%. Okay, so it's basically just showing you and splitting it out how if you see that the rate of exploitation is constant, the smaller the element of variable capital is going to necessarily lead to a reduction in the rate of profit. I don't know if I've explained that well, but that's just it's showing that if the rate of exploitation stays constant, it'll by definition will reduce the rate of profit. Yeah, I don't know. I
think it'll start to make more sense as we in the next part.
Yeah. Okay. So, does somebody want to? Who wants to take on the next part? 2.1.13, the rising rate of surplus value and its limited effect. Who's volunteering? Lexi, do you want to do one? You haven't done one in ages.
I was. Well, I think this part is actually like secretly super fucking important because let's see. I think this sort of. I just want to make sure this is the right section. Yeah, I think this is the one that implicitly pushes back on Heinrich's mathematical argument against Marx's presentation of the law of the falling rate of profit. So I think I've mentioned that before, and that, hey, at least this guy is trying to do math. He's just some philologist, right? Why is he trying to do math? That's not something they normally do. I think that's an interesting part of that guy's work. And this gives us basically a response implicitly. So let's talk about what it actually says. Let me see my notes.
Okay, so it's
the rising. Basically, the claim is that the rising rate of surplus value has a limited effect on the total surplus value created. Therefore, on the rate of profit. It also has a limited effect on the rate of profit, even if surplus value goes to infinity. And the total amount of surplus labor extracted cannot be larger than the total amount of living labor performed. That's like the reduction of this section.
So it's the idea that, like, if there is an increase in productivity, say I'm getting a certain amount of money so that I can buy a car and a DVD player and whatever, that as the productivity increases, the prices of what I need to keep my standard of living at the same rate materially, use value wise, will drop. So the idea of productivity can actually lead to a reduction in the price of, which should be able to, for the capitalists, be able to let the workers have the same standard of living with less money, so that there is this balancing act between the rate of profit going down, but also it should lead to a rate of exploitation increasing. That same dynamic.
Yeah, you can get away with paying your workers less.
Because
it costs less to reproduce them.
And the DVD is cheaper.
Your bread, your shoes, your clothing, they're all going down in price because they're produced more efficiently.
Yeah, and he makes a point that it might seem, therefore, that a sufficient rise in the surplus value can always in the rate of surplus value can always offset or more than offset the tendency for the rate of profit to fall, stemming from the replacement of workers by machines. But Marx anticipated and countered the claim in Volume 1.
let's read out this example. Do you see that? Imagine that first.
Oh, yeah.
This is the example we'll get across.
Okay.
Let me
so
highlight it here.
imagine that at first, for each $1 million of advanced capital, there are 5 workers, and that each worker supplies 5 hours of surplus labor per day. The total daily surplus labor is 5 times 5 equals 25 hours. Now, if, as a result of mechanization, the workforce is reduced to 1 worker per $1 million of advanced capital, the total daily surplus labor must fall, since in no case can it exceed 24 hours per worker. All right?
Yeah.
The rate of profit must therefore fall as well.
So in this case, even if a worker works 24 hours a day, every day of the week, every day of the year, the surplus could maximum be 24 hours. Well, so when there's 5 workers working 5 hours a day, the minimum would be 25 hours a day. So even though you can negate this part of the falling rate of profit, there is a limit to how much you can negate it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Anybody got any objections to what we're saying, or what Marx is saying, or what Kleiman's saying?
Yeah, and this is significant in the later literature because Heinrich's argument is that Marx only proves that the, if I remember correctly, is that Marx only proves that the rate of surplus value will fall and not the rate of profit. But if you have this mathematical understanding of Marx, it directly translates into this rate of profit falling.
Yeah. Literally, that example that I talked through and confused everybody with the S over C, with S over V and V equals over C, that disproves Heinrich. That is just, as far as I can see, it's basic math. I can't see how that anybody could make an argument against what we've just discussed.
Yeah, and it's only the right-hand side of that, the S over V, that has any sort of physical limitation, which is the argument. V over C, can vary.
Okay, let me see now. So, 1 second. So, what is next? The meaning of the tendential fall. Okay, who wants to have a go at this bad boy? Derek, have a go there. Derek is dead. Somebody else want to have a go while I'm doing something here for a second?
No, I'm here. Sorry, I forgot I was on mute like I was supposed to be. The meaning of the tangential fall, and this is actually important because a lot of people, including who we just mentioned, Heinrich, argued that a tangential law is a logical contradiction, and thus we could ignore this. So anyway, so the idea is that the reason why it's not like a straight immiseration is that there are other countervailing influences that are always working against the general decline in profits. So and that actually this decline is not the cause of crises, but is actually fixed by crises, thus creating a tendency but not a straight linear trend. That's how I've read that.
So what, as we talked about before, there's a recurrent devaluation of the means of production. The workers' means of subsistence is being reduced in price, and therefore the falling rate of profit is constantly overcome. And so you can't express the falling rate of profit as a kind of an empirical trend over time. It's more of an analysis of what's causing crisis. And I think there's a difference between reading. This is a crisis theory. It's not a breakdown theory. If that makes sense.
Yeah. He's talking about this is an overall general tendency, but there are counter tendencies to this. One of which I'm not sure if he goes into it. Is it in this? Yeah, it is in this chapter where he talks about, I think, how crises can cause capital to get devalued. So, for example, in the previous case, if we had the $1 million of the one guy working, and there was some massive crisis, and that company went bust, and suddenly we had one guy working, and somebody rebought, a different capitalist came in and bought that for $250,000 instead of $1 million, then his rate of profit would be 4 times what it was to the last capitalist. So
sorry, Tom.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so I was going to say the denominator in the C is being wiped out, which is putting the rate of profit up again, and therefore it's this sort of cyclical overcoming of this tendency.
So yeah, and so crisis here would also align roughly to the business cycle, but with a much better explanation of how the business cycle actually works and is generally given.
Yeah, I think we should also say something about some other tendencies that can negate it. Like if you go back to the 80s or the 90s, and if you wanted to record music, you had to go into a big ass recording studio that would have a big tape machine, and it was like £100,000 to set up yourself at a proper recording desk. And nowadays, it can be done on a laptop with like some mics and stuff to a very high level, similar to what it was. In that case, you can actually have the new technologies coming in, and I don't know, again, some background noise from somebody, I don't know who it is, but might be you, Derek. But so like a new technology like the computer can come in and say USB microphones and things like that, and they can actually reduce the amount of capital that's needed to set up a recording studio. So sometimes the actual technological advance can cause the amount of expenditure on capital, that you need for a business to drop dramatically. So there's a number of different ways, but that's also one that people don't talk about enough. They always talk about crisis, but they don't actually talk about technological reduction in the cost of capital.
Which interestingly, it would cause crisis in a way. Because it would reduce. It decreases socially necessary labor time, thus decreases the need for labor overall, and thus you have a drop in value.
Well, it would reduce the capital value, or the value invested by the big recording studios, but it would also increase the profit rate of people who want to set up, because if you think about it, the ratio of surplus value to capital invested would be much smaller. So the profit rate would go up. Well, you would think if everything was going, if all of everything was sold at the value, the idea of the recording studios back in the 80s, they would be able to charge essentially a monopoly rent, probably, because there was so few of them. But there you see that there are different tendencies. Just that one, I think, always gets neglected by people like Kleiman. They always talk about, say, a market problem, or say a crisis, but sometimes it's actually productivity that can do it at the same time. But
so there is an important line here regarding the devaluation of means of production that I think is sort of points to how you need to take this book in its totality. So last time we talked about the value of means of production, or the price of the value transferred by constant capital. Do you guys remember that discussion?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is just the thing that you highlighted there, Tom, on the screen is a consequence of that, and it sort of in the way I read it, this has to follow from the TSSI interpretation of how constant capital transfers value. So he's saying the devaluation of means of production is a consequence of increasing productivity. Now, what did we say that the value transferred by means of production was? Well, we said it was current cost, right? So current cost is going the current cost of your constant capital decreases over time as a consequence of increasing productivity. And this is a capital loss. So capitalists incur losses as a result of this devaluation. So therefore, part of the C is annihilated, and a portion of the capital value advanced in the past is wiped out. This has to be true if it is the sort of current cost of the means of production that matters, as he explicated earlier. So I just thought that was an interesting thing of how all of this sort of connects together, and why you just can't have one without the other.
Yeah. I don't have too much to add to that particular point. You did it's a pretty fair summary. Let's see. There is another thing that I wanted to get into here, which is the distinction between this reading and what Kleiman is saying is Marx's articulation of the falling rate of profit, or the law of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. What a mouthful. Versus a theory of collapse, or a breakdown theory. For Swampside, Rosa and I, among with our podmates, we read Heinrich Grossman recently, and his argument is basically as follows. And I think I garbled it when I was trying to say it on Swampside, but it's something like this: a law of the falling rate, tendential fall in the rate of profit. I'm just gonna call it that. If there is a tendential fall of the rate of profit, then capitalism will break down. First premise. Second premise. Marx thought there was a law of the tendential fall of the rate of profit. Okay? And then his conclusion is that, therefore, Marx thought that there would be a breakdown. And so the missing premise here is that Marx thought premise one, right? That Marx thought if there's a law of the falling to fucking you know what I mean? If there's the tendential fall in the rate of profit, then there will be a breakdown. And I actually kind of agree with Grossman that if law of the tendential fall of the rate of profit, if this is true, then capital will eventually deplete itself beyond its own social reproduction. But I don't know. I don't
think that follows.
I don't know if
that follows.
I don't know if Marx thought that. No, I think it might be true, but I don't know if this is what Marx thinks. And Kleiman is very.
Well, he never said it, so I think if you know.
Well,
I think if he told it, he said it.
This is the thing. Yeah,
it doesn't have to really be said that there's an end point to capitalism, and it would make sense that that end point of capitalism would be the result of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, like just sort of naturally.
Yeah, but that doesn't stand. I'm going to counterpoint here. If you actually do a philological look at what Marx actually advocated politically in his life, and I know this is not directly related to this, none of those assumptions make sense if you have a breakdown theory. Because if you had a breakdown theory, the impossibilist assumptions are coherent, but Marx rejected impossibilism, which is interesting. I was thinking about while I was arguing some I'll have to define all this because none of this is directly related to what Kleiman's saying. But if you actually do a kind of sound philological view of what Marx advocated in other papers, then the idea he was advocating for a final breakdown doesn't make sense, because impossibilism is consistent with a breakdown theory. And that's the idea that you don't try to reform anything because it's all going to break down anyway. And socialism by necessity and automaticity will win. And this has been assumed by a lot of by both Stalinists and Trotskyists. I mean, Mandel was a Trotskyist for a long, long time.
But here, so a couple things. First of all, I think you are right about this, and that Marx doesn't actually have a truly a breakdown theory. and that Grossman is potentially wrong about Marx thinking this. Secondly, I still think that it's that intuition that falling rate of profit will lead to breakdown. I actually think that's true. Like, I think that if this is the case, so I appreciate what you're saying, and I appreciate the political import of this. Yeah, Tommy.
Sorry, go ahead, Rosa.
I mean, yeah, people read breakdown as necessarily leading to communism, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
No.
Like, breakdown of capitalism can just lead to a form of, like, mode of production that's 1,000 times worse, or something completely beyond, like, what we would possibly even think of as, like, being I mean, maybe it would be like a return to, like, sort of a Soviet model or something like that. But, like, the concept of, like, a breakdown doesn't necessitate, like, this automatic, like, when capitalism breaks down, it leads right into, like, communism as we would want it.
There's a lot of stuff that I could bring up here to make this all more coherent. But they're all completely outside of the text, and this text avoids both philological and political argumentation. But I'm just going to say that I really don't think that if you see the tendency, the law of the tendency rate of profit to fall as linear, it would lead to a collapsist or breakdown model. But we've already discussed that it's not linear because there's countervailing tendencies that contradict it in capitalism, and that these would almost be metabolic. So,
I think there's a long-term tendency of the rate of profit to fall, and then there's these sort of, like, continuing crisis. I think we would, when we're talking about a long-term tendency at the rate of profit to fall and breakdown, we would be focusing on the long-term tendency of the rate of profit to fall.
He's saying bringing
about sort of a final crisis and a breakdown.
The long-term tendency is non-linear, so it's not a long-term tendency.
Well, there are people out there who have literally. I think that the guy Esteban Maito, I could be wrong, but I think he is kind of a grand collapse theorist of capitalism, and he has done, like, asymptotic lines, and I think that Michael Roberts might be too, showing that, the rate of profit.
Roberts, even though, like, Michael Roberts' work generally would suggest that there's some kind of breakdown coming, because he believes in a long-term tendency at the rate of profit to fall, and he tracks this through, like, K-waves sort of.
But K-waves are long business cycles too. There's also be a long-term tendency of profitability to renew itself according to those things. Except, as a physicist friend told me, and this is not something Kleiman does, K-waves are almost impossible to prove because those waves are consistent with statistical noise.
Yeah. So let's just say one thing. Can I say one thing?
I was just Can I
go on?
But he doesn't actually. He argues against collapse explicitly in the Long Depression. He argues explicitly against, like, collapse, capitalist.
I think we lost Rosa.
Rosa? Oh no.
I guess the last thing I'll say about this is that I think people think that Marx has a breakdown theory because he thinks communism is inevitable. But Marx thinks communism is inevitable because people are rational and self-interested, and he has faith in them.
Oh, Alex is back. We lost you. We lost both you and Rosa there.
That's good. Google Hangouts for you. Like, one thing I would say is that, we look at the Great Depression and we look, say, the 1970s in England, and the rate of profit in England was down to shit, and it bounces back up. So there's no, there's always room for capitalists to do things in the system. And the other thing I would say as well is that, I don't think anybody would assume that capitalism is the end of history. Not even Fukuyama probably thinks that. And like, so the fact that, you know, the fact that there's going to be another system post-capitalism does not necessarily mean it's communism. You know, that's a theory. That's not an empirical fact, or it's not something that can be tested. But like, I think we're getting into the weeds here.
Yeah. We are getting into the weeds. We're only discussing the end of the fucking world.
Yeah.
So it's understandable.
Yeah, we all know it's goddamn CO2 and methane. Anyway, it's the goddamn methane plumes.
Well, it could be an endogenous factor, like, well, you know, endogenous to the capital, like, logical circuit, or it could be these internal tendencies that end up doing the capitalism in. And the real political question is, you know, will the proletariat be ready to take rational action in time? Anyway,
well, the only reason I brought up what I brought up was not these discussions about the end of the world, because I actually do think that's somewhat tangential. Not that that the counterexamples that Kleiman uses are specifically there. Like, you know, Ernest Mandel is one of the better Marxist economists, but he holds this, what I do think Kleiman's right to point out, an error, and the politics endorsed by him are consistent with that error. So, I mean, like that, like in a way, a lot of people have accused Kleiman of simple economism. And, you know, I'm not going to get into his politics because we disagree on political matters, but that actually isn't the logical conclusion of what he's saying. Whereas, like, a kind of linear model would be, and I don't just mean like because yes, you could, the other conclusion of the tendency of rate of profit would be something like communization theory, where you argue that it's not possible anymore because of workers' conditions, but, you know, we're just going to all be Pol Potting it out because of climate catastrophe or something. But that's not here either. And while there are ecological and other implications, that's not what this text is not what Capital in this instance was dealing with. Yeah. So like, I do think it's somewhat important to disaggregate these claims, because, like, why is Kleiman, you know, why isn't Kleiman just a Mandelite? And, you know, because these also have implications for things that are outside of the immediate purview of the analysis of capitalism and what you think are the political answers to it. And I really do think that a lot of people have been uncharitable to Kleiman by reading him as advocating something that he isn't, because they read him as arguing for a linear decline or a crisis theory, and he explicitly doesn't. And was, you know, even in person, when I bring this up, that'll get him, you know, riled up. He's not. That's not what he's arguing for.
No, he has tremendous faith in the metabolic kind of renewing the spirit of crisis.
Yes,
which is really what Marx thought, and I think maybe a tad optimistic.
And it's also sort of implying that capitalism is in a way in a constant crisis.
But it's invincible because it's what Taleb calls anti-fragile, right?
And pulling from Schumpeter, it creatively destroys constantly. I mean, like, the Austrians actually kind of grokked this.
Exactly.
And they thought the answer to it was going to be, you know, that's why they were afraid of democracy. Anyway,
I just like to say that Taleb is a hack. I just don't want his name getting passed on my podcast without a critique.
I was reading some of his I don't know, life axioms about, you know, how erudite and smart he is, and he says stuff like never take financial advice from someone who works for a living. Really, really cool guy.
Yep.
Well, we've finished all of chapter 2.1. We've been on for 1 hour and 45 minutes already. Do people want to call it a day for this, or do we want to start hitting into chapter 2.2 for maybe a couple of sub chapters?
Chapter 2.2 kind of required, I mean, like, to be fair, this is the part I was afraid of, because I actually have to do reading outside of the book to make sure that all the interpretations are presented correctly. So that's hard to do.
Yeah, There's 5 little subsections here.
So we have the dual system interpretations, the single system interpretations, the simultaneous versus the temporal valuation, the simultaneous and the physicalism, and then we have value form, I think.
Right. I think we should perhaps save that for later, because if we start that now, especially when we come to value form, I get a feeling that we're going to be on this for another 4 hours.
I think Kleiman spends the most time on value form, it looks like, just glazing over it.
Well,
I think that's because
complicated thing. So
no, well, I think that's because he only deals with it in that place, because value form is essentially not dealt with at all in this book, because value form don't have a mathematical theory of dual system or single system or, you know, a value dual price system. I don't think they get into it from what he says. So he only really deals with the people who are Straffians and, you know, these Marxian economists that aren't value form.
Yeah, i.e. he only deals with people who have a fucking theory.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, and
not left Austrians.
Yeah. And exactly, precisely, which, you know, I wanted to rip into them soon. But I think well, let's have a look at the chat. We've got to say shout out to the chat. We've had Michael Johnson, Hibaru-san, Dionysus Itsu, that's you, Derek. Data Lore Delatera, Council Com.
Data Lore, it's a Swampside donor. What's up, Data?
Libertarian Lenin and Strands came back.
Yay! Oh man, come on this show, Libertarian Leninists, correcting us on basic capital categories and shit.
We've also had the return of the Lib Destroyer. That's A. That's a lot of A's. Yeah, thanks. I just thought it, you know, they deserve to get their name read out when it's such a good one. We also have the person with the Cyrillic letters from last week, which I actually went and I got the translation into Latin numerals so I could pronounce her name, so I could apologize for last week. That's to Kostya Zaszczyk. So Kostya, sorry for pronouncing your name entirely incorrectly last week. And we've got Cancel Com. So does anybody have anything to say on what we talked about today, or just general feelings on what is, say, the TSSI? That's what basically we've done there, is we've said this is what the TSSI in the 2 shows so far. This is what the TSSI is and what it thinks Marx actually meant. Does anybody have any issues or have any positive things to say, or just, you know, just any thoughts in general about it?
Thank you guys for walking me through the math, because it is more convincing once you really get down into the nitty-gritty of the math.
We're only starting, Derek. We're only starting.
Yeah, and when you're working through it like that and people object to this school, I really feel like the burden is on them to say why not. This is so intuitively plausible. And people are really reluctant to engage with what exactly is wrong, which, I've been sent a lot of different critiques, and it's, you know, when I was reading this book, I also, you know, wasn't sure what the stakes were, right? And when I read those critiques, I'm even more unsure of what the stakes are, because, you know, I don't know. I don't have any stake in. I don't have serious stakes in whether Kleiman's particular interpretation is right. But it, you know, it seems the most plausible when you pick things apart, at least in the way that Kleiman does when he's talking about simultaneous valuation or dual single systems, that kind of shit that we're going to get into next time. Yeah, I feel like the burden of proof is on the critics, because this seems to line up with the text so much. And, you know, not that I always agree with Marx, you know, as I pointed out, it seems to be loyal to the text.
Well, I also think it's not just loyal to the text. I mean, that's super important, and I think that's fair. But it also is loyal to text with the context of actual real numbers from actual real economic data. It is not all hypothetical thought examples.
Well, this book, Derek, doesn't get into any. This book doesn't really get into any empirical stuff. This is just purely theoretical.
But you can plug in the empirical stuff, and he does in another book, which is why I was thinking about it.
Okay, yeah, definitely. In his failure of capitalist production, he applies all of these things.
Although I think I'm running the two books in my head right now. So, but yeah, I mean, because these work, you can work with these with actual real number sets, which is what Kleiman actually did in his day-to-day life. So, like if it's not true, we should be able to figure out if it's not true, not just if it comports with the text. Which, yes, this is what this is doing, but it would be beyond, like, that's not merely enough, which was my other thing about logical consistency. Like, it's not merely enough to be I can imagine two alternative readings that both completely comport with the text and are logically sound, but both could not be right.
Okay, but that's an accomplishment by itself, honestly, because Marx is widely thought to be inconsistent, even by Marxists.
Yeah, sort of the purpose of the book.
I think the thing as well is, Derek, though, that the empirical data lines up so strongly with Marx that the only line of attack is a logical inconsistency.
Yeah, but Marx, I'm sorry, Kleiman later on in this book is going to go through a whole bunch of that evidence and saying why it's bullcrap, just as it did with the tendential fall in the rate of profit in this chapter, where it says it's not a trend. We shouldn't go looking in empirical data for rates of profit falling. What we should be looking for is crises. So in this book, he does not really deal that much with the empirical stuff. In fact, the empirical stuff he brings up is, empirical studies that he thinks is full of crap because they don't understand the theory that they're testing, right? So
that's true, and I think he's definitely right there. But he does in his own book, when he does the empirical data into the falling rate of profit and stuff, like, he does apply it empirically there.
True.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to say is that, Lexi, have you? I just received my copy of Stephen Jay Gould's The Structure of Evolutionary Theory there the other day.
Oh, yeah.
You get it as well? Okay.
Yes,
Have you started reading it?
I haven't had a chance. I've been doing a lot of editing and reading for podcasts.
Fair enough. I just not too much of it now, about 20 pages in. But he has a chapter where he's talking about so he's talking about whether he considers himself, say, like a Darwinian, if you want to put it like that, the equivalent of like. So the newer evolutionary theory differs from some of the stuff that Darwin had said or predicted or thought would work or whatever. I'm only getting into it now, but he was saying that is what he is. He was trying to talk about whether is what he is close enough structurally to what Darwin had said to call himself like a Darwinian. And he's saying that yes, because there are certain core concepts in there that while there might be tinkering at the edges, that we do consider ourselves to be like, or himself to be like, an inheritor of Darwin and certainly a part of that broad, not even broad, but like he considers himself a Darwinian theorist. Now, like the way he describes it, when we go and we look at all the people that we're going to get into now, when we get into the next part of the book, who call themselves Marxian economists, like, for me, the general broad structure of what they are saying is what they think is correct is so fundamentally different to what would be Marxist analysis as we've understood it so far, that I don't see how they can call themselves Marxists. The most generous thing you could say about them, that they would be post-Marxist or just plain Straffians or something. But it's interesting. I found it just when we're doing the two things at the same time, I'm reading Stephen Jay Gould and we're reading this book, and it really struck me that, like, by Gould's criteria, when he's talking about who's a Darwinian and who's not, like, none of these guys would actually, you could reasonably say, that they're actually Marxist economists, in my opinion.
Well, I read that part in college, so I think I remember what you're talking about. And this is, you know what, this is what I'd say for them is that, so Marxism especially, but also just Marxian thought, right? Like, of course, the economics is the most scientific part in the classical sense of, you know, using mathematics and yada yada. So it seems particularly perverse for someone who thinks themselves as a Marxist to abandon that part or to think that that part is wrong and continue being in the tradition. But the truth is that there is also a theory of history where, you know, every society is built on exploitation of some kind. And people have tried to, some people that accept, okay, maybe Marx was wrong on the math, right? And maybe they're wrong to say that. I think they're wrong to say that. But they still try to conceive of history as a succession of modes of production, of exploitative modes of production. So they might not be Marxist economists, you know what I mean? But I would still think of someone like that that's trying to reconceive of exploitation without Marx's labor theory as a Marxist because of their broader philosophical and political commitments.
Yeah, I mean,
but they're maybe not
I-
a Marxist economist.
Yeah, I was about to bring up like Robert Brenner. Like, I'm pretty sure he doesn't really believe in the labor theory of value, even like in a Ricardian sort of sense, or like econophysics sort of sense of like a labor theory of value. And like basically I would still consider him a Marxist because ultimately he believes class struggle is like the motor of history, and like his work as like sort of like political Marxism in general is important in the study of like sort of like Marxist history because he puts a greater emphasis on class struggle than like his peers who may be like more Marxian in the sense that they have a theory of labor value, or they stick more closely to like Marx's own explanation for like the transition from feudalism into capitalism, which is more market-based than Marx's own explanation. But Robert Brenner and like the political Marxists still fit within like that, within like historical materialism as a science because they view class struggle as a central part of history.
Yeah, so the analogy to Darwin that is often made has always struck me as a little bit specious because Darwin was focusing on a very specific set of problems. And Marx is not. I mean, like, one of the theological points I do like to remind people about Capital is it was supposed to be like one volume in a series that dealt with the entirety of bourgeois society, including political stuff. And the more Marx got rigorous into the capital conflicts, the more he realized he would never get to the other. I mean, that.
Yeah, well, I agree, but I just mean it like with respect to Marxist economics. That's kind of what I mean.
Would you say that's true of like the Mandelites and stuff? I think they are. I mean, like, I think they are. Like, they would.
Mandel would agree with Kleiman on most things.
Yeah, I was about to say he agreed with Kleiman on most things except for like the linear. I mean, except that Mandel thought there was going to be a final crisis. Like,
so like I don't have objections to that. I have objections to the people who think that, you know, that the rate of profit is physical. The rate of profit can't drop. You know what I mean? Value doesn't mean anything. I just find that if you're an economist and you say all of those things with respect to Marxist economists, like economics, it's, you know, you're essentially saying the exact opposite. I just can't see how you can call yourself a Marxist economist and say those things.
Right.
You know,
It's
you can say
insulting to
Marxist
all
historian or whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry, Emmanuel.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. But yeah, I mean, it's insulting to Marx's economic thought not to sort of do what Kleiman is doing and trying to make Marx make sense, and just completely discounting or disqualifying a priori Marx's rigorous, you know, economic theory that, I mean, to be fair, and Derek, you said this as well, like Marx is not really good at explaining his economic theory. He's more interested in, at least in Capital Volume 1, of laying out the argument and working through, step by step every part of the process, which is, sort of why this book is so great, is that it does it the other way around. I just have one closing remark to sort of tie up what I've been thinking about with this reading, and to hopefully bridge the gap to the next section in 2.2 about the TSSI. What is it all about? And to those of you looking at this on YouTube, it's right there in table 2.2. TSSI, what is it about? It's the temporal single system interpretation. Looking at this, it's all right there, man. It's temporal. Why is it temporal? Well, because for this table to make sense, it needs to be determined in a sequence, going from left to right. It's a single system. And why is it a single system? Well, because total prices and total values are the same thing. And the total price profit rate and the total value profit rate are the same thing. Or have the same magnitude. So we can have them in the same matrix and split them up on different columns. So it's a single system, and it's temporal because it's sequential, and time actually matters. And the way you think about these things, the sequence you think about these things matters. And if you do it in this one particular way, it makes total sense. So that's just my closing remarks on this whole sort of thing, I guess.
Well, I just spilled a giant glass of water all over my desk, and so I hope nobody thought I was urinating or something with the sound effects there. I was struggling violently to try and get my laptop out of the way. So hopefully this is still broadcasting. So
everything's fine, Tom.
Although I did actually urinate on the desk. Damn it, you caught me. I was desperate. We've been on for 2.5 hours.
It has been a moment. I guess I'll say one thing about Marx and Darwin, because now you got me thinking. I think there's a parallel here where you have some earlier works that have a broader kind of view of a thesis, and then you have some later works that draw in on a specific part of the thesis that's relevant to our lives. And those later works are not are the more controversial. So in Darwin, you have The Origin of Species, which is sort of the centerpiece of the Darwinian worldview. And then you have The Descent of Man. And in The Descent of Man, you get into the theory of sexual selection. And those later Darwinian texts are rejected by some Darwinians, right? But they still uphold The Origin of Species. Does that make sense? And those people could be fairly thought to be Darwinians, but maybe they're, soft Darwinians. They're not hard Darwinians, right? And I think very much we have the same tendency with Marx. We have the theory of history. We have the Communist Manifesto, the theory of communist politics, the study of society across time, of modes of production. We have that body of work that forms this broader version of the Marxism, but then we have his later, more specific work to our lives on capitalism and his specific theory of the inner workings of it. Not yet. Some Marxists do not go with this, and maybe they are soft Marxists, and maybe this is the difference between a hard and a soft Marxist.
I liked it better back in the day when there were Marxists like Gramsci, who I don't say a lot of nice things about, who were actually honest about the fact that they were deviating from Marxist theories in such a profound way that it was almost not the same thing.
I have no problem with that. Sorry, Derek.
Yeah, I think my last point is I also think, just when I talk about the political consequences of this, I do think that we could all agree that everything in Kleinman's Reclaiming Marx is true, and that it's perfectly empirically applicable, but that isn't even beside the point in some cases. The logic still holds, and we would still have significant political deviation between us. So I don't want people to think that I think this is like, if we get this, there's going to be one neat trick and it's going to all fix Marxist politics and everything tomorrow. I don't think that's true at all. But I do think there's got to be like some kind of minimum ground on what we talk about when we talk about Marxist economics. Otherwise, like, I mean, I often feel like when I'm discussing this, I'm playing tennis without a net. Like, I don't even know. Like, I have trouble critiquing people on podcasts and stuff when we talk about Marxist economics, because I don't even know what the assumptions that they're bringing into the situation. Because there's so many different background theories that you can't necessarily even, like, they're not even always using the words the same way. So that's maddening to me. And it's good to like clarify and have a consistent, a consistent logical view. And that's all.
Yeah, I think it's really important for us people on the podcast left, or whatever we want to call ourselves, to actually do the work and go through the stuff. And if, and make a return to actual Marxist economics dominant in our left, for our left analysis, because I think it's very important. I think it's up to us to put forward what we all think is correct and to proselytize for it too.
Yeah, I mean, the popular quote Marxist podcast unquote are also, they have very different conceptions of Marxist economics, and this is a big if they have a conception of Marxist economics at all, which most of them don't seem to.
Well, they might have conceptions of economics, but those are often not Marxist.
The thing I would say what Derek was saying about Gramsci, I completely agree. Like, I have no problem in picking holes with what I think is wrong with Marx, but I have big problems in people picking holes of what is right in Marx. And I have no problems with other people having different ideas of different theories in Marx. The more the merrier. But like, my whole thing is like, I think Marx is right, and I think we got to show he's right. That's the way I'm coming at it.
Woo!
Yeah. So I think we'll wrap it up, guys. Let's see. Is there any more comments in the chat?
I would really like to hear Alex's closing remarks, and just
yes.
Sure. Well, it's nearly 5 a.m., so I'm not sure if I can trust myself to provide a cogent summary. But I think, yeah. So a couple of years ago, I attended a lecture by Bill Mitchell. I think you've actually had him on your podcast, Tom, the MMT guy.
Yeah.
And I went up to him after the talk, and I was quite young at the time, and I asked stupid, naive question, is there any relationship between MMT and Marx's value theory? And his response was, well, value theory is flawed. There's no transformation of prices into values or vice versa. And that was just the end of the story. I was just shot down instantly. And having gone through this text, I feel better equipped to respond to that, and just not just accept that received wisdom.
Yeah, like I think any of the major people on MMT, they're all post-Keynesian, and they all are explicitly non-Marxists, and Steve Queen is equally as withering and is equally as inaccurate in his stuff. Look, I don't have any problems with, say, a post-Keynesian, some of them saying that, when they don't know all the ins and outs of the TSSI and all that stuff going on, because they were brought up being taught one thing.
But if you call yourself a Marxist, you should be able to speak about these debates and put this theory forward.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. Like, I was just looking today and I came across a video, they had Novara Media interviewing David Harvey, and it's got like 50,000 views. And I'm like thinking, David Harvey, his new book that's coming out apparently is supposed to be how Marx didn't have a labor theory of value. That's what we're up against.
Yeah. There's so much noise out there, and I think this is an important work to go through and get right.
Hard to argue with the biggest Marxist economist, Richard Wolff, who I don't feel as inclined to speak about, but David Harvey, who's not an economist.
Yeah,
at all. Well, not even a little bit. He's a geographer. So
he's not even coherent. I went to a talk of his. I went to Coventry. I went on the train, went 100 miles in the train to go to listen to a lecture of his. And I was only getting into Marx at the time, and his talk was entirely incoherent. So it was kind of shocking to me. He was, I don't know, talking about Bitcoin or something kind of insane. So,
it's
quite
strange how you can teach Marx's Capital for 40 years, having read through it sentence by sentence hundreds of times, and still not get it.
But I think they get it. But I think they were like a lot of the Marxists aren't able to compete on. They are not able to compete on the mathematics of it, so they just go with the flow of what's the dominant school.
But like,
I think that is a lot of it.
Yeah, sure, but like,
Harvey works in an academic institution. He could get someone to check the math.
Yeah, and also like the maths are in the text, man. Like he says in text, total values equal total prices. He says in text, the average rate of profit and the general rate of profit tend to equalize or are equal to each other. He says all these things in text, and like David Harvey will. All right, I'm going off on a tantrum here, but like Harvey will textually contradict Marx. So this is why I like there's no. I'm not sure I'm buying this whole, well, they read the text and they understood the text, but they're just bad at math. They can't be. Both can't be true. Like, if you understand the text and you understand the argument, then all of this other stuff makes sense and follow directly from that. I just don't see how you can read Marx closely and carefully and say the things that David Harvey says. I just can't square it. But maybe I'm not, maybe I don't have the imagination or something of David Harvey, but I'm just at a loss there.
You don't have the lovely Gandalf beard. Well, guys, will we, guys and people, everybody, can we say we'll give it a rest for tonight, and we'll reconvene hopefully next week at the same time?
Yay!
Works for me.
Yeah. Yep.
Excellent. We're going to, I think next week we'll try and get all through the rest of chapter 2 and maybe into some of chapter 3. Like, I did think we might get all of chapter 2 done today, but I think it's good to take as long as it needs. But yeah, so thanks everybody for coming on, and thanks everybody in the chat. And Lexi, if somebody wants to be included in our mailing list on Facebook, should they friend you perhaps, and you can add them?
Should we make like a page for this? Because this is going to be a multi-week project. It's an interesting thing,
like a Facebook page.
Yeah, just for whatever this is.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, good idea. Let's do that.
So, and people could like that, and that'll be their little update station.
Okay, that's a great idea. Let's do that.
All right, great.
Okay, everybody. Thanks very much. We're going to go off air, and then we can chat a little bit more if you want to for a few minutes. Okay, so thanks everybody for listening, and thanks everybody for joining in. Thank you very much.